My name is Tanji, and I'm the founder of 1124. 1124 is an organization that promotes prevention education through an intersectional lens and through community practice. So some of the work that we do is prevention education for young people and adults, capacity building, and doing I had a little echo. So I'm happy to be here with you all today. Happy to be here as well with Haley. Oh, Haley, you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Tanji and Sarah. I'm also really happy to be here. Grateful that people are spending a couple hours with us. And I'm especially excited because I see a lot of familiar names on the screen. So I'm glad to be back in community with folks in Wisconsin, and really looking forward to our conversation today. We're going to go ahead and start with just something fun. A get to know you, would you rather poll. So we're gonna pull that up on the screen. Tanji's gonna pull that up and share the link, I believe, just to get us started. Do something fun, engage with each other. Tanji, you're muted now.
There we go. It's one of those days.
Already.
So here's the link you can go to at the top, pollev.com/cozyplant302. And then I'll also share the link for you as well. And okay, so if you all have gotten started, I see a couple people have logged in, so I'll wait a little bit longer. It's anonymous, so it looks like people are already starting the polls.
Can you put it in the chat box, Tanji?
Yeah, here we go. This is the first question I'll put in the chat box too, but it looks like folks are already starting to answer the question. So just give me one moment and then I'll put it in the chat box as well. Cause
I can do it actually.
Yeah, if you can, because it won't let me do it. The same link I sent you if it's on there. But I'm seeing for the first question, there are already some folks who started to answer it. Cool, thank you. So the first would you rather question is, would you rather only drink coffee every day for a year or only drink tea for a year? So I see it's a lot of coffee drinkers in here. 71% of folks said that they would drink coffee every day for a year. I'm a tea person, so I probably already drink tea every day for a year. All right, and then we can you can keep answering questions. I see more people are starting to join now. Next question. Would you rather eat an entire stick of butter or drink a whole bottle of hot sauce? So it looks like a lot of folks would prefer eating butter instead of hot sauce. And I'm just so curious if anybody wants to answer in the chat box why they chose to eat butter instead of drinking hot sauce, or if you're a hot sauce drinker, why did you choose drinking a bottle of hot sauce? Butter is good. I agree. And that, like, if you're a person that like bakes or just likes butter on food, you might already eat an entire stick of butter. Okay, next one. Would you rather dance to every song you hear or sing every song you hear? So it looks like we have a lot of singers in the audience, a lot of folks who would rather sing everything. Less stomach issues with the hot sauce. I see that. Yeah, that would be the, I think that would be the thing. So unless you have something to coat your stomach when eating hot sauce. Lots of singers. All right. I see that. All right, now go to the next one. would you rather talk to the same people every day or talk to new people every day? So a lot of folks want to talk to the same people every day. Yeah, and we were just talking about it too, like just how isolated we all are. That might be actually very true. We are talking to the same people every day. So only a few folks wanna meet new people every day. That sounds like a exhausting experience to talk to new people.
Maybe we only have like a few true introverts in the group.
Yeah, I see that. All right, next one is a little bit different. This is the last one. Would you rather step in when you see some harassment happening or wait to talk later when you see harassment happening? So a lot of folks will intervene immediately and say something when they see something happening. So if we think about many of us prevention folks have heard of the 3Ds. So it seems like maybe people will be more interested in doing something right away as opposed to waiting or delaying some of that intervention. So interesting stuff. And that is the last question. That was the last one. So thank you all so much for being a part of that icebreaker. As we move forward with this discussion, we will talk about how sometimes even our biases and our implicit bias can impact even the way we respond to harassment when we see it and how we engage in bystander intervention.
All right, I would love to just get to know everyone in the room a little bit. So I'm gonna put this in the chat box. Tanji and I would love for you to share your name, pronouns, your role at the agency or wherever you're doing work in the community, and an emoji that describes your mood right now. So while you are sharing, I will just share a little bit about why I do this work. So I lead an organization called the Safe Bar Network, and we have a very singular focus, and that is to partner with bars and other alcohol serving venues to increase safety. And this work is really important to me because I remember when the violence prevention person came to my class when I was a sophomore, so I was about 16 years old. And she was from a different city and looked different, dressed different, talked different. And we were all really excited. We were looking forward to what we might learn and what she might share with us. But she stood at the front of the room and in a very monotone voice, she recited statistics about violence, sexual violence, dating violence, stalking. And it was painfully boring. A minute later, class gets over, we're all out in the hall. Throughout life, I see people who experience sexual harassment. I have friends close to me who experience sexual assault. And a lot of times I don't know how to help them. Sometimes I don't even know that what they've experienced has a name that you can like put a label on it if you want to. And I certainly didn't know what to do to prevent it. And so I've spent, the last 10 plus years trying to figure out how do we engage people in really meaningful ways so that when we have that opportunity with a group of sophomores or we're in a bar or restaurant or with a community group, they feel like they're the experts in preventing sexual violence. And long after we leave, they're still using the skills that they've talked about with others and that they've shared about to make their communities safer. So that's really what drives me to do this work. Just reading through the chat now.
Thank you for sharing that, Haley. I have a very similar experience too. I started doing prevention work as a sophomore in high school, and I didn't realize it was prevention work at the time, but we had a traveling play where we would go to different schools in the community and do little vignettes around dating abuse and sexual violence. And again, at the time, I was just doing acting work, but that was a really fun introduction into prevention work. And it carried me throughout being a prevention educator. And it's a reminder that prevention can look different. And it's different ways that we can engage beyond, like you mentioned, statistics and doing more things that feel like school with young people, especially. And I'm so happy to see so many prevention folks in the chat. I always feel like I'm in community when I'm around people doing prevention work.
All right, so this is going to be an interactive session. If you're, as Sarah said, we're recording, so if you're not comfortable having your camera on, that is totally okay. But if you are, we invite you to turn on your camera as we move through the conversation, because it really will be a conversation with all of us, not just Tanji and I leading the way. Please unmute yourself and chime in when you have something to say. I know for me, it's a little difficult on Zoom to know when it's my turn to speak. So if you're like me and you have a hard time jumping in, if Tanji or Sarah or I see that you've unmuted yourself, we'll know that you want to share something and we'll invite you into the conversation. Of course, you can always use the chat box. And then we will do a couple different breakout rooms throughout the session. So we ask that when you join your breakout room, that you're ready to engage with others and participate. If you're multitasking or you're responding to a crisis in your agency, please just don't jump into your breakout room. And then there won't be confusion about like, oh, I see Sarah's here, but her camera's off and she's muted. I don't know if we should, ask her. So that will just help us run things a little bit more smoothly here on Zoom. All right, and we're going to jump right into working together. Tanji, take it away.
So one thing that I like to do when starting to do any type of group work or any kind of workshop is by setting some agreements, and I like to do that by honoring stories. I like to do that by honoring stories because if we think about it, everything we know about sexual violence, about domestic violence, dating abuse, it comes from someone sharing their story. And while we're here and we're gathered, we're in community with each other. We all showed up because either we, care about this work, we're interested in it, we want to learn more. But we all come from different places and we all have different experiences. And so with that, honoring stories gives us an opportunity to acknowledge our own experiences and also acknowledge the experiences of others. So this is like a call and response. So if you agree with these things, or I ask that you repeat after me. The first one is I honor my story. And you can say it in chat box, say it to yourself, but by honoring your own story, that means that you're giving honor to yourself while we're together. So if you have to take breaks, like Haley said, if you need to step away, feel free to do that. It means that you're invited to share your stories and experiences because this is an interactive workshop. But even if you don't share your experiences, they are still valid. They still matter. They're still meaningful. And again, you're more than welcome to share your experiences here. The next one is I honor your story. And that is for all of us who are gathered here today. Like I mentioned, we're in community with each other, and we want to make sure that we're giving honor. And I like to use honor instead of respect because we honor things that we don't know about all the time. You don't have to know everything about something to give it honor. And I feel like it goes a bit above just respecting it, saying, I still hold this to a high regard. And I hope that while we're sharing our experiences, that we're giving each other honor and that we're recognizing that it's not always easy to share your experiences. So we're giving each other space to speak, to share, or to choose to not share. And we're still encouraging each other while we're here today. And the last one, which I think is most important, is I honor the stories of those who are not in the room. So while we're here, Haley and I will be sharing stories about experiences that we've had with people. Some of you might even share some stories. And as educators, I know we use storytelling in our practice all the time. If you are even advocates, we use it often. And sometimes we have permission and sometimes we don't. So with that, I want to make sure that we're still giving honor to folks that we might acknowledge that may not be here. And when we honor stories of folks who are not here, we're also honoring people who may have experienced violence, who have not shared it. people who have shared it and who are not believed. We're acknowledging young people who don't feel safe, letting folks know what's happened. We're honoring people who may have experienced harassment but weren't really sure that's what that meant. I like to always honor the folks who have guided me and helped me to become a prevention educator. I like to honor my grandmothers. I like to honor my mentor, Brenda Perryman. I like to honor the young people that I've worked with who have molded and shaped the way that I do education work. And I also invite you all, if you have folks' stories that you want to give honor to at this time, you can unmute yourself, speak it out loud, or you can write it in the chat box. And while you're doing that, we can move to our first activity. We're going to do some breakout rooms. And during this time, we're going to do a parent share. So you'll be split up into groups of 3. And during this parent share, you're going to share, you can share your name, your agency, and all of those things. But one thing we want you to talk about is to share what people assume about you based off of your identities and what is actually real. So for example, as an advocate and a person who is really interested in feminist thought, especially Black feminist thought, and a person who cares about violence against women, people assume that I just hate men, I just don't care about other people, and I'm only for the rights of women, and that's it. Which is really not true. It's not real. I would even more so say I'm more of a womanist and for everyone, right? And for the protection and peace of non-binary folks, of men, of all ethnicities. So my work is really for the people. So just because I choose to focus a lot of my energy on relationship abuse and domestic violence and issues that concern mostly women, I still care about the experiences of all people. So that is some of the examples you all can share. So you can use your work, you can use your family, your role or position in family. So if you are a child in your family, what do people make assumptions about? Or if you're a parent, what do people make assumptions about? So you can choose whatever identity you choose to focus on. So yeah, we'll split that up and then we'll put the discussion questions in the chat box, and you all will have some time to answer those questions. So if you have anything in the meantime, just let us know and I'll put this in while Haley splits you all up into groups.
I actually already put it in there. And we'll come back together at 1:30. So you'll have about 10 minutes to talk to each other. And I'm going to go ahead and create the rooms now.
Back, everyone. I hope you had a good time chatting with each other. So we just wanted to have an open dialogue, a larger group discussion, just to talk about some of the things that you all heard. So what are some of the assumptions that you all heard and what was real, if anyone wants to share that with a larger group? And you can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat box.
We kind of mentioned how often we hear the term battered women shelter, and we explain like, no, we welcome everyone. And we just kind of discussed how much we hate the word battered. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a good one. And I think it shows just the evolution of the movement in general, how the focus was so much on women and on not even just women, but viewing women who've experienced violence as being battered and taking on that identity that they might not even carry. Thank you. Any other ones you all heard? So I see in the chat box, people assume lack of experience or knowledge from me since I'm 21, even though I've had my background experience in my master's in forensic psychology. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So what I'm seeing is like some ageism and adultism that can happen when folks are younger. The assumption that you just don't know as much, you don't have as much to offer just because of time or experience or age. I also see all of us made a comment about people assume that happy and positive and or young people are naive and do not know how to do this work and help people in ways others can. Yeah, thank you. So very similar. A lot of assumptions that can be made if you are someone who's young, and happy and positive. And, I think that's so interesting because after a certain amount of time, people just assume that you're supposed to just not have that positive outlook because the work we do is with things that are, most people don't talk about every day. A lot of people aren't going throughout their days talking about things like violence. And so I think you're right. I think the assumption is you're supposed to be in a down mood just because of the work that we do. And that's an assumption that can be harmful because there's so much value in having that positive attitude. Also talked about how people are judged by the way that they look. Right. Um, Thank you for sharing that too. I think that especially if you're a forward, front-facing person from an organization, sometimes people might make assumptions. I know just going along with age, working in middle schools and high schools back when we were in person doing them, I know I would walk around school sometimes and folks would think I was a student walking around. I've been asked for a hall pass before. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I see that, Alyssa, how do we survive if we're sad all the time? That's so true. That's so true. So did you all notice? So I see a couple things that came up. So one theme I'm seeing a lot is age. So people making assumptions based off of a person's age, assuming that because you're a younger person, you must be naive, you must not be capable or qualified. Well, we know that's not true because young people can do this work. It doesn't really have an age on who is capable of being impactful in this work. So any other ones you all see, any other identities that came up or any other biases that may have come up during your discussion? All right, well, if there's nothing else, I will pass it to you, Haley.
Thank you, Tanji. Yeah, so many of the things that you all shared and what you shared, Tanji, resonate with me too. I think that we have our own implicit bias about who can do this work and who should do this work that we carry with us when we're deciding what communities to work with, what grants to apply what curriculums to use. And so we want to spend some time thinking about that and discussing that. This hasn't always been the case for me, but as I've worked with bar and restaurant communities, somewhere that I am a complete outsider. I worked very briefly in the food and beverage industry and I was terrible at it. I've learned that there is so much knowledge and expertise and so many people who are already working to prevent harm and increase safety within the food and beverage industry. And it's really helped me to see that the best messengers and the people that should be doing this work are actually the people who work within that community. And I think that's true across the board. And so we want to spend some time thinking about implicit bias and building some skills around recognizing our own implicit bias and holding ourselves accountable and holding each other accountable. So I'm going to share a scenario with you, and then we are going to break into breakout rooms, and we're going to spend about 15 minutes talking with each other and working through some discussion questions. And then we'll come back together again and talk through what came up for you, what were some of the themes that you spoke about, and what are some of your ideas for holding yourselves and others accountable as we think about expanding beyond schools and working with new audiences. So here's the scenario. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat box now so that as I read it, if you're a visual learner like me, you can see it. Okay. So you have a great relationship with a local high school. All the teachers are supportive of your program and look forward to you coming in to provide student workshops. After a workshop, you mention to a teacher that you're interested in attending an upcoming parent night. They tell you not to waste your time because the parents that need it won't show up anyway. You ask them what they mean and they say, you know the kind, while smiling and walking away. So in your groups, we want you to discuss the following. Is this scenario realistic? Have you seen something like this before? How did it turn out? And then how do we hold ourselves and other people accountable when bias shows up in our work? So I'll put these in the chat. Oh, Tanji already did it. Awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and break you into a little bit larger groups this time, so that if there's someone who can't join, you'll have enough people to have a really great conversation. Welcome back, everyone. So I would love to just start by hearing, is this scenario realistic? Was this something you could relate to? Feel free to let me know in the chat box or unmute and share.
Yes.
100%. Vanessa?
Our group had definitely seen stuff like this occurring in our communities before, and especially while working with community partners. A lot of biases, especially about families that are homeless and different things like that. Something that our conversation transferred to was talking about a lot of judgment when it comes around to donations, like in-kind donations in this area, because we've all experienced having people donate items that are used or damaged or expired. And a lot of times we get feedback from people saying, well, they should be grateful. They deserve this. Or that if you're getting handouts, that you should take whatever you get. And talking about how that takes away dignity and taking away people's choice, and how it's kind of like a constant fight to try to encourage our community to see people as something beyond just someone who is homeless. Caitlin brought up a really good point that she had seen a Christmas tree with little ornaments on it in her community that said help families in need. And all the items underneath that had been donated were new. And then she had seen a different tree that had help families who are homeless, and a lot of the items were used. So it kind of brings up some of that bias that comes in when people are thinking about how they give back and connect with those families in need.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is not something I would have thought of, but as you are talking through it, it 100% makes sense. And I've seen that bias come up even, in my life and in the work that I do. I'm curious, Vanessa, and if anyone else in your group shared, how do you address those things when they come up? How do you hold people accountable or encourage people to have some self-accountability?
So I struggle with this in my role. I've definitely had a few moms that there must have been a Pinterest thing this Christmas that if you take 5 toys from your kids, they choose 5, they donate it, they can get 5 from Santa or something like that. And I've had to turn down those used toys because they're not items that fit our clients' needs. And they've gotten pretty upset because they don't like the idea of giving it to Goodwill or St. Vincent de Paul where it's going to get sold. So trying to talk about how we use these community resources, such as voucher programs and other community organizations that we use that do accept those items that our clients have access to, can definitely help kind of soften that blow of, no, I don't want your used clothing. Being able to say, hey, this organization and this organization, they also accept these items and our clients use them and other organizations' clients use them. And it can help even more people in our community, not just our clients.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love how your response not only encourages them and gives them a way to continue engaging with you, but also provides them a little bit of education so that they understand the systems a little better. I think that's an incredible way to respond to that bias as it shows up. I'm curious for other groups and other folks, is this scenario realistic? And I'd love for you to share kind of how it shows up in your work or in your community.
I can share a little bit. So I would say as a whole, we talked a lot about how more or less that there's usually some bias surrounding teachers and in the education system, whether you're looking at specific teachers and them saying, because I've heard comments and I shared with my group that I was actually training to be a teacher for a while. So I got the inside scoop too. But there's definitely biases in that they'll say, well, that student's a lost cause. Like we just don't pay attention to him, or they're just dumb, or they're out of control or whatever. So we ignore them or what have you. So I think that, and then obviously that stems to their families, like they don't connect with families as much because they think that it's not worth their time or their effort and things like that. So that was a big thing. And then, and I've just seen that like working. So I'm actually the campus specialist who works with the college age, but I've worked with our youth services and gone into like high schools, and I've seen that, and it's sad. It's very sad to hear that. And obviously when we're in there, we try to give everyone the same amount of attention, despite what the teachers say, to try to make, also to kind of, I hate to say it, but kind of prove a point that these kids are capable of learning and are capable of being engaged. And then we also kind of chatted about the fact that there's some pushback in schools because of the sex education curriculum or the health curriculum, that sometimes they want us to come in there, but we have very specific things that we can talk about, and that's it. And something that I specifically brought up is that it's very confusing to me, or conflicting to me, that we're going in there to talk about violence, and we're going in there to talk about, unhealthy behaviors and relationships, but these students may not even understand or know what a healthy like sex life looks like, what a healthy sexual relationship looks like, what a healthy relationship looks like. And even if you're telling them these are what healthy relationships are, if they don't have that foundation going through their like the education system or from their parents or from ever, you can only do so much in that brief period of time that you're allowed in that classroom. And so I think that that's very challenging as well. And that's obviously a bigger social issue, but that's a huge challenge too, in terms of the biases and having that mentality of, well, this happens, but we're not going to talk about it that it happens, or you can only talk about it for 20 minutes and that's it, So
Yeah.
that didn't not, sorry.
Go.
I was just going to say that did not do justice for everything that was talked about in that conversation or in our breakout room, but that's some of the stuff we talked about too. And then we also talked about different programs that we've been trying to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, that resonates for me. I've experienced that conflict myself. I worked for a long time in schools in Missouri, and same kind of setup going on where you can talk about the negative stuff, the stuff we want to avoid, but you can't paint a picture for the positive or what's possible or what would be healthy. And I think that is a great example of how bias can play out in so many different ways. So we may be entering those situations with that conflict, right? And with our own implicit bias about the administrators or the teachers. And it can impact the way we show up to do the work. And it also, for me, just reminds me why it's so important to work the best we can to build relationships and really meet people where they're at. Maybe that's on the ground floor. And then just continuing as we build those relationships to push them further and further and further and further. And I think a lot of how we do that is exactly what you said. We show them what's possible. So we engage with those students who are a lost cause, and we weave in bits of the positive, healthy stuff where we can. And we continue to show them what's possible and push them forward. Tanji, did you want to say something there too?
Yeah. And I can agree with that too, with just going into schools and going in with the mindset of, okay, this is what I'm tasked to present. And I know what I noticed after like a couple years is that we have pre and post tests, and the students would do so well on the pre-test. And they would get everything right on the pre-test. So it, for me, showed they know a lot more than what we think we're in here trying to show them or share them. And when we go into schools, young people have different examples of relationships. And for some, it might mean that they have seen healthy examples, or for others, it might mean they've seen abusive examples or harmful examples, or maybe they've experienced harm. So because people are coming at different levels, I think having that relationship setting, like you mentioned, Haley, and having discussion and dialogue be part of education programming, and as we've been talking about, utilizing different ways to engage with people beyond this is what we have to do. Like how I always think about how can we best use that short amount of a little bit of time that we have with young people? What'll be more impactful? Repeating the same workshop that we do every single day, or having a conversation that's going to be relevant to them and that answers and addresses some of the more individualized questions that they might have. I think that's a common theme that happens with folks everywhere. And I think too, with some people, I'm thinking especially about Black girls making the assumption and adultification bias that's there that, oh, you must know everything, so I really don't have to talk to you about some of this stuff. Or even young people of color in general are often over-sexualized and have an assumption that they just know about things and they're just aware of things when that might not even be the case. I remember at one point I had to really confront the fact that this might be the first time anybody is talking to some of these students about sex at all or about consent at all. And something that Kelsey was kind of saying too is that, it's so hard to even talk about something like consent or about something, and what Vanessa said too, something about consent or personal agency, when the schools are not even looking at them as valuable or worthy of having this information of knowledge, and they fall through the cracks. And that's usually what we see, is people think that someone doesn't care, and because they think someone doesn't care, then they just say, well, we'll just go with the people who do care. And that's when we end up missing out on so many people, especially true young people.
Yeah. And I think everything that we've talked about up to this point expands beyond young people and beyond schools. I've seen the exact same thing happen as we work with folks working in the food and beverage industry, adults in different communities, that some of these same themes come up again and again. We underestimate what people know, or the work they're already doing to increase safety and the skills that they already have. And so do those around us. So I want to push people a little bit to do some problem solving here. So I'm curious, what are some strategies that either you heard about in your group or you're coming up with as you process for holding yourselves and others accountable? Like, what are those things you say? What are those questions you ask yourself or others? I'd love for people to kind of leave this section with something written down or an idea that they can have going forward. How do you hold yourself or selves or others accountable when bias shows up in your work?
Sorry, this might just be me just speaking out loud and being brutally honest, but as a person who has faced bias just in general in her own personal life, how I see bias is challenge it. Like, why are you saying that the parents don't need to hear about this, or that it's not worth your time? Why? Just challenge it, and just, everyone needs this education. A lot of we've seen, and we spoke about in our breakout room, that there are a lot of, school districts and colleges that have very, narrow-minded or very old thoughts in regards to, healthy relationships and consent, or not even acknowledging that there are issues in the area that are affecting their school and their students, such as human trafficking. And even, unfortunately, one of the issues that we had here, actually in Greene County, was that there was a entire school that were getting nude pictures of students. And when we have approached the school, hey, we would love to talk to parents and students about, what this is and how we can help this in the future, as in not sharing any pictures or anything like that. They just said, we don't have that issue. So that's just kind of like my stubborn headedness, like bias, hit it head on.
Yeah.
And challenge it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that. I love that your way of confronting it is asking a question. That's always the hardest thing for me to do in the moment, so I've been really working personally on just like having that question in my back pocket, like just being ready, like when I get that gut feeling to be like, why do you think that? Tell me more about that. And that's helped me kind of be prepared in those moments to challenge that bias. Thanks again for sharing that. I'd love to hear from someone else. How do you hold yourselves or others accountable when bias shows up in our work?
Haley, I like what you just said about asking questions, because I think what that does is it catches people off guard sometimes, but it also acknowledges the fact that I heard what you said, and I'm also just curious as to why. And I think it helps people to investigate their own self in a way. And I think without without saying, hey, that's not okay, it gives them the space to actually problem solve and think about it in their own way, so that hopefully it's not a continued behavior after that.
We're going to move into a conversation about all of the options for prevention and all of the different communities that we can work with. But as we talk about this, if you have ideas, if things come to mind for addressing implicit bias or holding ourselves or others accountable, I would love for you to message them to me, and I'll share them or put them in the chat, because I think that, as we've talked, and Tanji and I have talked with other groups about this, it is a challenge, and the more ideas we can share with each other, the more prepared we'll be to change minds or help people learn. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Tanji to move into our next section about prevention work.
So as we've been talking, it sounds like a lot of folks are doing work in schools. And I know that might look different now, especially because of the ongoing pandemic and having to move things virtually. And so for the longest time, schools have been the target area and space for preventionists, because that is the space where young people are gathering. And it's easy to go to schools because, we know that young people will be there. We know that there are also other caring adults that are there. And I know with the pandemic now, it's forcing us to go outside of our comfort zone. And my hope is that as we move forward as preventionists, we continue to push ourselves and go outside of those comfort zones. When we solely focus on school, we're acknowledging and buying into the fact that schools are not only a space where young people gather, but a safe space to have these conversations. And the reality is that might not always be true. Young people don't always feel safe in schools. And at the same time, just doing education with solely young people eliminates the other caring adults in their life that can contribute to prevention. So when we only focus on school, we have to abide by school standards, like what was mentioned with abstinence programs. And we also miss out on understanding how people who are at community centers or other spaces that young people gather are doing and engaging in prevention work. And the truth is, bias can show up because we value sameness, we value things that are comfortable, things that we know. And in order to do this community engaging type of prevention work, we have to step outside of our comfort zone. And that also means that we have to address some biases that we carry that we might not always acknowledge. For example, working with folks who are living without houses or without permanent residence, there's bias that's there. And I believe that is a population that is so easily forgotten just because it takes a little bit more effort to reach them. And it takes us doing a whole lot more. And so we really have to ask ourselves, especially again, now that school looks different, where are the people gathering? That's a question I always wonder, if we're working with young people mostly, where are young people gathering right now? And what does it require us to do to be in those spaces where they're gathering, or to engage with folks who are working with them? And at the same time, where are the adults in their life gathering right now? Who is already doing some type of work with young people that might not be specific to our work, but still offers us the opportunity to work with a population that we may not have worked with before. So what we're gonna do now is I wanna ask you all that question. So where are people gathering? Where do you think in your community people are gathering and building some of these meaningful relationships within your community? I can give an example of some of the work that I've been doing outside of traditional school. There is an organization in Detroit where I am called Alternatives for Girls. It is for parenting and pregnant young people. And some folks are already have children that are there, and some folks are currently pregnant. And the idea is, and some folks might think, well, if a young person is already pregnant, if a young person is already engaging in some type of relationship and they're living in shelters, and they must be a lost cause. But that's not the case. What we do when we go to Alternatives for Girls is we don't do a traditional PowerPoint presentation. We do things that are meaningful for them. So we've had groups where we made waist beads and talked about body autonomy. We've had groups where we dance at the end of it, or we use music to talk about things. We talk about how they want to parent their children, because that is still prevention work. And so the more we start to think about where people are, I think the better chance we have of moving ourselves beyond the traditional ways that have served us only so much. So again, you can unmute yourself or put in the chat box, where are people gathering and building community in your, building relationships in your community? Bars, yeah. Another space where people are gathering. Sports, absolutely. So that can be like professional sports teams and also local ones and like little league teams. And as we're asking this does not have to be places where you're actually working. It could just be acknowledgement of where people are. So I'm seeing work and jobs, right? Church, right? Another space. And clubs like the Y, community centers. These are all great. Virtually, thank you for bringing that up. So like Nextdoor and Facebook. Yeah, that's a good point, because in all of the neighborhood apps are so popular. So that's another space, you're right, where there's opportunity to engage and meet with people, or at least make people aware of what type of services you provide. Any other spaces you all can think of where people might be gathering? Neighborhood groups, weddings, community center. One project I'm working on with folks now too is we're working on planning, and it's something I've done before too, are like beauty salons and barbershops. Are spaces where people are gathering, and there's opportunity there not only to reach out to clients, but also to reach out to folks who are stylists and people who connect with folks that are they're in community with. Any other spaces you all can think of? And there are no wrong answers right now, because we are just brainstorming. Cafes, yeah. Right. Thank you, Sarah. So gathering does not always have to be physically in person, because right now we know we have a lot of limitations with that. So people also gather on YouTube and Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. I'm also thinking of like forums like Discord is another space where people are having discussions, or any kind of forum space, or even gaming. The gaming community is pretty big. So on what is the Twitch? Thank you, Kelsey. As I was saying, it's so Twitch, right, is another space where people gather. Especially young people might gather and be engaging with each other that is outside of school. These are all really great. And I hope that as we've been having this, you're thinking of spaces that you might even frequent that you never thought that your work could be a part of being in this space. As we were sitting here, I was thinking, I was today at there's a laundromat coffee shop that is in my neighborhood. And I was there working earlier and doing laundry. And as we were talking, I was like, wow, I wonder if there is opportunity here. They have like a community space upstairs. So what might that look like? They have flyers about other organizations and projects in the community. So it got my wheels turning of what I can do in my own community. So I hope that you all, this is time now to even write some things down and start to think on your own what is around you in your own neighborhoods that, and I know for some people, you might not actually work within your community, or your organization might not have that service area, but I don't think that means that you can't still promote things like prevention, even if you're not, funded to work in that space. Yeah, I see you, Sarah. It's the most convenient, nicest thing. They have breakfast sandwiches and everything. It's wonderful.
I want to share a story about how prevention work outside of schools looks different. So I worked for a long time for a rape crisis center in Kansas City, and we had the privilege to have quite a bit of prevention funding and get to try lots of different things. And I remember working with an educator, Keith, who worked primarily with young men, doing a program we called Boys Strength Club, very similar to the program for athletes that I'm blanking on, and coaching boys into men. And there's another men's curriculum that I think that they took stuff from and created a curriculum in Kansas City. So he was working with boys at a community center close to our offices. And he was coming in with all of his education and experience around how to teach and how learning should happen. And so he was trying to motivate the young men there to engage in these conversations with him and really think about masculinity in a variety of ways, and be critical of the unhealthy parts and really build healthy masculinity within themselves. And in order to motivate them, he said, hey, okay, we will talk about this for 30 minutes and then or 45 minutes, and we'll spend 15 minutes playing basketball together. And that worked the first session. They were really engaged, and he played basketball with them afterwards. But beyond that, all the boys wanted to do was play basketball. They wanted to play basketball and hang out with Keith. They thought he was a really cool guy. And I tried really hard to help Keith understand that if he's there as himself, as a representative of our agency, playing basketball with the boys, that he's imparting healthy masculinity, that he doesn't have to sit down and walk through a curriculum, that his presence and engaging in sport with them was all the opportunity he needed to teach them and help them practice and learn these aspects of healthy masculinity. And because of his own implicit bias and his experience and how he was brought into this field and taught to do this work, he just couldn't do it. And he ended up canceling the programming there and not taking that opportunity to build those connections. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years, we had another educator on staff, Sean, who had, you know, a totally different set of experience. He had spent all of his time in youth development and came into the field of sexual violence in the fifth decade of his life, way later on. And he really understood that in order to meet these young people where they were at and engage them in learning, that he had to do it in a creative way, especially for young men and different communities within our larger city. It was going to be most beneficial to engage in sport with them, or play other games with them, or you know, have lunch with them and talk about their lives, and come to those conversations with his life experience and everything he knows about healthy relationships and sexual harassment and preventing sexual assault. And he understood that by engaging in prevention in that way, he was building up protective factors for sexual violence, and he was addressing some of the risk factors for sexual violence. So he understood that. And I know that it goes beyond individuals, and sometimes it's also work to get our organizations to understand that and understand what prevention looks like in different ways that we can engage folks. And so we want to give you those tools today. So Tanji's going to share a list of risk and protective factors, and we're going to spend the rest of our time together practicing, so doing some of this work. So we'll talk about risk and protective factors, and then we'll give you a scenario and give you time to work together and start to build what could prevention look like outside of schools in a different setting.
Thank you, Haley. And before showing the risk and protective factors, I do want to share this quote from Audre Lorde, who says, "Without community, there is no liberation." So we talk so much about why community is important because it's necessary, and that community, that liberation is not just solely individual liberation, where we're saying, hey, you have all these healthy relationship skills, you have all these anti-violence skills, you should be good in the world. We know that's not true because of those biases that folks can carry sometime within our own community. So in prevention, risk and protective factors can help us to see who could be at highest risk, and also what are some things that are already there and opportunities that are already there for folks to feel protected against violence. So some of the risk factors, or sometimes risk factors, can be described as, well, girls and women are most at risk, or LGBTQ folks are most at risk, or Black kids are most at risk for violence, or folks living in poverty or homelessness are most at risk. And when we create language in that way, what we do is we promote some of the biases that we carry. We make the risk being a person's identity, as opposed to looking at the systems that make that person's identity a risk. For example, instead of saying Black young people, Black girls and women are at highest risk for violence, we can say because of racism, because of systems of racism and sexism, of misogynoir, that's why Black girls and women are most at risk. We can talk, instead of saying folks who are homeless or living in poverty are most at risk, the reason why is because of things like classism that people carry and beliefs about folks living in poverty. That's what makes them most at risk. And often, as we've talked about, when we have this assumption or belief about certain people being at risk, we sometimes view them as a lost cause. And what we can do instead, and what can work as a protective factor, is to think about what systems are in place that are making people's identities be more at risk, and how are we contributing, or how are we shifting things so that's not the reality. Other risk factors can include a history of abuse, so that could be experiencing it or witnessing it, unsupportive environments, which for some young people, school is an unsupportive environment, and exposure to violence in general, which with media, that exposure to violence sometimes is almost unavoidable. But there are protective factors that exist that give us some hope and some opportunities to look at things differently. So a protective factor could actually be opportunities, and that could be opportunities for learning, education, or even engaging in dialogue about things like violence. Positive role models. So that example Haley just gave, someone who is willing to allow young people to be themselves and is a model for them to see that, you know, this what you're interested in is okay. Someone who is interested in the same things as you can also talk to you about things like healthy relationships. Another protective factor is economic stability. And we know within our communities that there are disparities that are there. So how can we offer support in different ways? Who is interested in our community and uplifting our economic statuses? Supportive adults is another protective factor. Having high self-esteem. And so one of the best ways that we can promote self-esteem with young people is by validating their experiences and also seeing them as valuable. And that can require us to address, again, biases we might have against young people or beliefs we might have against young people. And then having good coping skills is another protective factor as well. And that requires space to practice some of those coping skills too. Another one that's not on there is community efficacy. So it's even feeling a part of a community and feeling like as being a part of community, I know that I have value and it's important. And I also know that my community is there to uplift me and to support me. So thinking about these risk and protective factors, we're gonna do one more scenario in breakout rooms. And we're gonna talk about how we can use some of these risk and protective factors to make decisions about how we do prevention. So the scenario is, and we'll put in the chat box, you identify that a community pool would be a great partner and you have some connection with staff there and groups look at the risk and protective factors and see which ones you can address to address violence prevention at the community pool. So again, you see a community pool is a great partner and you have some connections there. How can you use these risk and protective factors to address violence prevention and work with the community pool? And so we're going to split you up into groups. And if you have any questions, as always, just let us know. And once you get into the group, so post the scenario, and I'll also we'll share the risk and protective factors as well.
All right, so what did you talk about in your groups? What ideas did you have for engaging the community pool?
I can speak for our group. There were a lot of really good ideas. We had Sophia really speaking to thinking about different like variety nights that you could have that would draw a lot of different families and be an entry point for lots of different forms of interest. And Kelsey had been talking about if there was like an interactive game that you could host at the pool using the game, like you have supportive role models, you are building healthy relationships, it's engaging, you have lots of different community members mingling together and sort of sneaking in like consent culture and important concepts in the game. So it doesn't have to be preachy PowerPoint form, didactic lessons on sexual violence, but finding other ways to incorporate those things. We talked about access. So maybe the pool is providing transportation or free entry on these like special nights, because you'll also really increase reach just by the people who happen to be at the pool, and maybe not necessarily know about the night, but feel engaged and called to participate because of this happening. So while we couldn't come up with the curriculum itself, there was a lot of different ideas of how to get families involved in an interactive way that was just really positive and accessible to a lot of different families.
That's wonderful. Those are incredible ideas that you came up with in like 10 minutes. So very impressive. I love this idea that it doesn't have to be a lecture. It doesn't have to be a curriculum, that we are, talking through these PowerPoint talking points that we can have people learn through their experiences. I would actually argue that people learn more and it stays with them longer when they learn through experience and there's some sort of emotional connection, whether that's joy or love for one another, or feeling supported and feeling loved. So I think that's wonderful. I also saw in the chat, Vanessa shared adult swimming lessons. What a great way to build self-esteem and confidence. Like, that's a great idea for hitting on one of those protective factors. Games for all ages, having a police presence and using posters, a photo booth to educate on consent and self-esteem. I really like this idea of bringing community together. So maybe, I'm reading into it a little bit, but I know we've done this in the work with Safe Bars, that oftentimes we'll invite like a liquor commissioner or a police officer who does patrols into the training so that they can see what we're doing and build relationships with the bar owners and the staff, so that when a problem does happen, it doesn't feel scary or punitive. It feels like, oh, well, I know Officer Joe, and we had that good conversation and he's going to help me solve this problem, or other way around, right? If Officer Joe's going to the bar for some reason, he's able to come off his relationship with the staff there and maybe approach them differently, or approach them with this idea that they're going to solve the problem together. Tanji, I'm curious what thoughts you have as you hear this.
I love the adult swimming sessions and including the entire family, because I imagine the space like a community pool is one that will have different kind of families too. And so it's a way to not only, like I said, engage with the formal adults in our life, but also like some folks are more informal too. And I think there's a space too to include like lifeguards. And we can think about it not solely as education workshop, like you said. So looking at posters or photo booths or pop-ups or tables, or even passing out maybe something that is related to swimming. Maybe you have some consent stylized goggles or swim caps or something, or flip-flops, or however else we can raise awareness about things like healthy relationships. I think is definitely something that's important to do. So thank you all for that. I think the ideas are great. And the overall thing is just using what is already there, even doing things that are supportive for young people, like you said, raising their self-esteem. So that could be doing trainings with swim coaches and talking about how they can incorporate things like body autonomy, or seeing if there are like policies at the pool that might reflect biases or might not be as inclusive as they might have assumed. That's another way that prevention can happen that's not explicitly doing education workshops. Great job, everyone. And so as a final wrap up, one thing we wanted to do is just offer another way to think about how we can do this community engagement. So I'm going to share one more slide, and you probably already saw it if you had the link that was sent with the risk and protective factors. But I wanted to share my method for community engagement and how I've done it in the past. So one of the things I've done before I looked at it is these three things to think about: who people are, where they are, and what is important to me, and what is important to them. So this actually came from young people. I was doing a roundtable with some youth activists, and I was asking what would make them want to get involved with social justice movements. And the first thing they said is knowing who we are. And so the picture I have on there is a picture of a seed that is growing. And that's because sometimes as educators, as advocates, we come in with the assumption that we know the most and that folks are blank slates and that all we have to do is just fill them up with knowledge and they'll be all good. But the truth is that people already come with their own things when you meet them. And what seeds really need is nourishment. They need a good environment, they need water, they need proper sunlight, they need someone caring for it. And that's how they bloom to their full potential. And we have to look at young people that same way, that they already come with their own thing. So how can we contribute to their nourishment? And without trying to change them, because we don't really teach seeds how to be certain kind of seeds. We really rely on what is important to them, right? We have to look at what they already know, who's around them, what are some things that might, make that environment not good. Are there weeds that are attacking our seeds so they can't flourish? So what does it look like for us to create an environment based off of who they already are? And then the second part is knowing where we are. So now that we know who is falling through the cracks, who we're not serving, where are they? And we kind of answered that earlier, right? We started to think about all the places that people are gathering and building relationships in our community. And so that's the other part. So once you know who is missing from your scope of work, find out where they are, where they're gathering. And we have some ideas already, like online spaces and actual physical spaces within your community. And the last one is knowing what is important to us. Just as we said, sometimes we come in with our own ideas about what's important to people or what should be important to people, and it's totally irrelevant. So with that, just keep it in mind that sometimes we have to do a little bit of that footwork to find out what is important to people. You might think, hey, they need an education workshop, and I think that'll help solve this issue of violence that's happening. And that might not be it. Maybe they need people to support the events that they're doing. Maybe they could benefit from having a connection to another resource that's available. Maybe just talking about healthy relationships is not the case. Maybe they want to specifically talk about navigating online dating. So just figuring out what is important to people and tailoring the work that you do to what their needs might be. And I'm fully aware that this community building practice requires time, it requires commitment, and it definitely requires us stepping outside of our comfort zone. And again, as we've been saying, addressing some of those biases we might carry that may prevent us to reaching folks that we usually wouldn't reach. So you have this on that little short slide, those 3 slides that are there. And I hope that as we move forward, you all start to think a bit more about how you can engage with folks outside of that traditional school setting. What does it look like to do prevention in the world and outside of that traditional education setting and still view it as valuable and important prevention practice?
I just want to, as you were talking, Tanji, it made me think of, it may require educating funders and grantors and providing some of the same information we went through today so that they have a better grasp of risk and protective factors and see the value of some of these non-traditional ways to engage communities in violence prevention. I am going to put a survey in the chat. It's just a 2-question kind of post survey. Tanji and I would really appreciate your feedback. It should only take a minute or 2. I know that we are getting down to the end of our time together. Tanji and I will stick around and answer any questions you may have or point you to additional resources you might find valuable. But thank you so much for spending time with us today. I appreciate how engaged everyone was in their breakout sessions and in the larger conversation as well. So thank you.
Yes, echoing all what Haley said, thank you all so much for being here and for participating and for sharing with us some of the things you all are already doing.
Thank you so much, Haley and Tanji, for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge. I know that this was really helpful for me as a prevention support person. When folks come to us and say, like, help us think of new ways to do our prevention work, I feel super inspired. Like I have 1,000 new ideas. So thank you so, so much. Thank you. And everyone have a good afternoon. Take care.